The Allies, having successfully landed in Normandy months earlier, had begun their advance deeper into German-occupied territory, pushing the Nazis back inch by inch. But the brutality of war was far from over. The tide of battle was constantly shifting, and for every victory that the Allies won, there seemed to be another battle on the horizon, one that promised to be even more brutal than the last. In the midst of this chaos, a seemingly inconsequential event occurred, one that would change the course of one man's life forever. It was a moment that seemed trivial in the grand scale of the war, yet it would be one that would echo in the hearts and minds of those who would later hear about it. This is the story of Clemens R.S., an army cook who, on one fateful day, would find himself face to face with a German general, forced to make a decision that would test his very survival. The beginning. An ordinary soldier, Clemens R.S., or Clem, as his comrades called him, had always considered himself an ordinary man. He was not a hero, nor did he seek fame or recognition. He was just another soldier, drafted into the army during the early days of the war, not because of any desire to become a hero but simply because it was his duty. Clem had no aspirations to lead men into battle, nor did he possess any formal training in combat. His role in the military was simple. He was a cook, tasked with preparing meals for the soldiers who fought on the front lines. He spent his days working in makeshift kitchens, stirring pots of stew and preparing the sustenance that kept his fellow soldiers alive as they fought their way across Europe. The war was a distant concept for Clem. While the front lines raged on, he remained far behind the action, quietly working to provide comfort through the simple act of preparing food. In the chaos of war, food was a luxury, and Clem took pride in doing his part, ensuring that his fellow soldiers had something warm to eat, even as the world around them fell apart. He was never part of the action. He was a support system, one that soldiers rarely thought about but relied on nonetheless. Yet, on the morning of October 17, 1944, everything changed. The call to action. Clem had spent the morning preparing stew in a small, makeshift field kitchen near the town of Metz. The camp was bustling with activity. Soldiers moved about, cleaning their weapons, sharpening their bayonets, and getting ready for whatever lay ahead. The sounds of distant gunfire could be heard in the background, but Clem had long since grown accustomed to them. They were part of the daily soundtrack of the war, a constant reminder of the battles being fought elsewhere. As he stirred the stew, he noticed that the atmosphere in the camp had changed. The usual calm had been replaced by an uneasy tension. Clem could sense that something was amiss. Soldiers were moving faster now, their faces more focused, their expressions more serious. The air seemed to vibrate with the sounds of artillery fire growing louder, inching closer with every passing minute. Clem wiped his hands on his apron and stepped outside the kitchen tent to see what was happening. The camp was alive with activity, but there was a sense of urgency now. Men hurried past, their faces set with grim determination. Clem instinctively felt that something was wrong. The sounds of artillery fire were unmistakable, and the rumbling seemed to be getting closer. There was no time to waste. Clem's mind raced as he tried to piece together what was happening. He had heard rumors of a German counteroffensive in the region, but he had not anticipated that the Germans would make a move so soon. The camp was already preparing for the worst. Clem watched as soldiers gathered their gear, and officers hurriedly issued orders. But amid the chaos, Clem could only focus on one thing. He was trapped. He was far behind the front lines in a makeshift kitchen, without any weapons or combat training. What could he do? What role did he play in this fight? As he stood frozen in place, he heard the unmistakable sound of boots crunching on gravel. Clem's heart skipped a beat. Someone was approaching the kitchen tent, and the footsteps sounded urgent. His instincts screamed that danger was near. He quickly turned and looked over his shoulder, only to find himself face to face with a German soldier. The encounter with Major General Hans Schmidt. Clem's blood ran cold. He had never been this close to a German soldier before, and the sight of the rifle aimed directly at him sent a jolt of fear through his body. The German soldier stood in the doorway, his rifle raised, his eyes scanning the room. Clem's mind raced as he realized that he had no escape. The soldier was not alone. More German soldiers were quickly filling the tent, and they looked prepared for a fight. Then, at the front of the group, Clem saw the one man who would forever alter the course of his life. Major General Hans Schmidt, a notorious and ruthless commander in the German army. Clem recognized him instantly. Schmidt had gained a reputation for his brutal tactics and his leadership of one of the most feared divisions in the German army. The general's presence was enough to send a chill down Clem's spine. What was a German general doing so far behind enemy lines? Clem didn't know, but he knew that he was now face to face with one of the most dangerous men in the Nazi military. For a moment, time seemed to slow. Schmidt's eyes locked onto Clem's, and the air between them seemed to crackle with tension. Clem could feel his heart racing as he struggled to find his bearings. The general's cold, calculating gaze made Clem feel like an insect under a magnifying glass, trapped and at the mercy of an enemy that held all the power. Schmidt spoke, his voice thick with a heavy German accent. "You American cook," he said. "What are you doing here?" Clem was stunned. He couldn't find the words to respond. What could he say? He was just a cook, doing his job, but now here he was, standing face to face with a German general, alone in the kitchen tent. The situation was surreal. Clem was supposed to be far from the fighting, far from the bloodshed, but now it had come to him. The unexpected moment of courage as Clem stood frozen in place. His mind raced. He was out of options. There was no way out of this situation. The general's soldiers were closing in, and Clem had no weapon to defend himself. The ladle that he had been using to stir the stew was the only object within reach. In a moment of pure survival instinct, Clem grabbed the ladle and swung it toward the general's face with all his might. It was a desperate move, one born from fear, adrenaline, and the fight-or-flight response that kicked in when survival was at stake. The ladle made contact with Schmidt's face with a sickening thud, knocking the general off balance and sending him stumbling backward. The room fell into stunned silence. Clem had just struck a German general, a man who could have ordered his execution on the spot. The soldiers around him tensed, their hands hovering over their rifles, ready to react. Clem's heart pounded in his chest as he stood there, the ladle still gripped tightly in his hand. But then, something happened that Clem could never have anticipated. Instead of ordering his men to shoot, General Schmidt did something entirely unexpected. He smiled. "You are brave, American cook," Schmidt said, his voice surprisingly calm. "But do you know what the consequences of such an act would be?" Clem, still in shock, stared at the general, his grip on the ladle tightening. The situation was surreal. He had just struck one of the most powerful men in the German military, and yet he was still alive. The tension in the room was thick, and Clem's mind raced as he tried to understand why the general hadn't retaliated. The general's decision for a moment. There was only silence as the two men stared at each other. Clem's mind was a whirlwind of confusion. What did Schmidt want from him? Why hadn't the general ordered his men to kill him on the spot? Schmidt raised his hand, signaling for his soldiers to lower their weapons. Then, in an unexpected move, he spoke again. "I will let you go this time, American," the general said, his voice steady and cold. "But remember, next time, the consequences will be far worse." With that, Schmidt turned and motioned for his soldiers to follow him. They filed out of the tent, leaving Clem standing there in stunned silence. He could hardly believe what had just happened. He had faced down a German general and somehow survived. In the days that followed, Clem never spoke of the encounter again. He returned to his duties as a cook, preparing meals for the soldiers in the field. He didn't seek recognition for his actions, and he never told anyone about the German general he had faced alone. To him, it was just another strange chapter in the madness of war, an unlikely moment of bravery in the midst of chaos. But in the years that followed, Clem occasionally found himself reflecting on that day. What if he hadn't swung the ladle? What if Schmidt had reacted differently? It was a moment that had forever changed him, but one that he would carry with him quietly, without seeking fame or attention. For the rest of the world, Clem's story remained just another untold moment of heroism in the vast sea of World War II. But for him, it was a reminder that, even in the most improbable of circumstances, survival could depend on the smallest of actions. Clem had faced a German general, and against all odds, he had lived to tell the tale.